I've always been fascinated by the unexplained, the creatures that lurk in the shadows of our world. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, chupacabras, I've read about them all. But there was one cryptid that always captured my imagination more than the others: the Dover Demon. Maybe it was because I grew up not far from Dover, Massachusetts, where the creature was first sighted in 1977. Or maybe it was those haunting descriptions: a small, pale figure with a watermelon-shaped head and glowing eyes. Whatever the reason, the Dover Demon became my obsession. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Ben Carter, and until recently, I was just a mild-mannered accountant living a quiet, unremarkable life. I collected books on cryptozoology, spent hours on online forums discussing the latest sightings, but I never actually went looking for these creatures myself. The thought of encountering something truly unexplainable terrified me as much as it thrilled me. All of that changed the day Grace Miller walked into my life. It was a Tuesday, I remember. I was at my desk, mindlessly inputting numbers into a spreadsheet, when Dave, my insufferable coworker, leaned over the cubicle wall. "Hey Ben," he said, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's a reporter. Don't tell me you finally found Bigfoot in your backyard." I ignored his snickering as I stood up, straightening my tie nervously. "A reporter? To see me?" As I walked to the reception area, my mind raced with possibilities. Had someone discovered my online posts about cryptids? Was I about to be exposed as some kind of crackpot? But all those thoughts evaporated when I saw her. Grace Miller was nothing like I expected. Young, with sharp green eyes and a mess of red curls, she exuded an energy that seemed to light up the drab office. "Ben Carter," she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Grace Miller from the Boston Herald. I was hoping we could talk about the Dover Demon." My heart skipped a beat. "The Dover Demon?" I repeated, aware of how foolish I must sound. Grace's eyes sparkled with excitement. "That's right. I understand you're something of an expert on the subject." As we talked, right there in the reception area of my accounting firm, I felt a shift in the air around me. Grace wasn't there to mock me or expose me as a weirdo. She was genuinely interested in the Dover Demon, and more importantly, she believed it might be real. "There have been new sightings," she told me, her voice low and urgent. 3 in the past month, all around the same area where it was first spotted in '77. "I want to investigate, but I need someone who knows the lore, the history. Someone like you, Ben." I should have said no. Should have told her I was just an armchair cryptozoologist, that I'd never actually gone looking for these things in real life. But something in her eyes, in the way she spoke about the demon with such conviction, made me nod. "I'll help," I heard myself say. "When do we start?" That night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. I was an accountant, for crying out loud. I dealt with numbers with irrational and explainable. What business did I have chasing monsters in the woods? But as I tossed and turned, my mind kept coming back to Grace, to the excitement in her voice, the passion in her eyes, and if I'm being honest, to the way my heart raced when she smiled at me. Our investigation began the following weekend. Grace picked me up in her beat-up Jeep, and we drove out to Dover. As the familiar landscapes of my childhood rolled by, I felt a mix of excitement and dread building in my stomach. "So," Grace said as we drove, "tell me everything you know about the Dover Demon." And I did. I told her about the first sighting on April 21st, 1977, when 17-year-old Bill Bartlett saw the creature while driving with friends. How he described it as having a large, watermelon-shaped head with glowing orange eyes, and a thin body with long, spindly fingers. I told her about the other sightings that followed in quick succession. John Baxter, 15, and Abby Brabham, 15, both reporting similar creatures. How the sightings had caused a media frenzy, drawing UFO investigators and cryptozoologists from all over. But then it just stopped, I said. No more sightings, at least not credible ones. Until now, apparently. Grace nodded, her eyes on the road. "That's right, 3 sightings in the past month, all within a mile of the original encounter sites. And Ben," she hesitated, glancing at me, "there's something else. People have gone missing." A chill ran down my spine. "Missing? You mean?" "I don't know what I mean," Grace said, her voice tight. "But in the past 2 months, 3 hikers have disappeared in the Dover area. No traces, no bodies found. It could be nothing, but it could be something, I finished for her. We spent that day interviewing locals, asking about the recent sightings and the disappearances. Most people laughed us off, but a few seemed genuinely frightened. An old woman, her hands shaking as she spoke to us, swore she'd seen the creature in her backyard just a week ago. "It was looking in my window," she whispered. "Those eyes, Lord help me, those eyes weren't natural." As the sun began to set, Grace suggested we head into the woods where the original sightings had occurred. I hesitated, my old fears bubbling up. "I don't know, Grace. Maybe we should come back in the daylight." She looked at me, her expression a mix of disappointment and challenge. "Come on, Ben. This is our chance. All the sightings happened at night. If we want to see this thing, we have to be out here when it's active." Unable to argue with her logic, and unwilling to look like a coward, I nodded. We grabbed our flashlights and headed into the darkness of the forest. The woods at night were nothing like I remembered from childhood hikes. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I jumped at every sound, my flashlight beam jerking erratically across the underbrush. "Ben," Grace whispered, putting a hand on my arm. "Relax. You're scaring away every animal within a mile radius." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Sorry, I'm just not used to this." She squeezed my arm gently. "It's okay. We're in this together, remember?" As we walked deeper into the woods, I found myself talking to fill the silence. I told Grace about my childhood fascination with the Dover demon, how I'd spend hours drawing pictures of it based on the descriptions. "I used to imagine what it would be like to see it," I admitted. "But now that we're out here, I'm not so sure I want to anymore." Grace was about to respond when we heard it, a high-pitched keening sound, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was somewhere between a bird's cry and a child's wail, echoing through the trees. We froze, our flashlights scanning the darkness. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "I don't know," Grace replied, and for the first time, I heard a tremor of fear in her voice. "But I think we should." Her words were cut off by a rustling in the bushes to our right. We both swung our lights toward the sound, and for a split second, I saw it. A pale, hairless form, a large oblong head, and eyes, huge, lidless eyes that glowed orange in the beam of our flashlights. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like I've never screamed before, and then I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear Grace behind me calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line, gasping for air, my heart feeling like it was about to explode out of my chest. Grace emerged a moment later, her face flushed and leaves tangled in her hair. "Ben," she panted, What happened back there?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed back at the woods, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Grace looked from me to the dark trees and back again, her expression a mix of concern and excitement. "Did you see it?" she asked. "Did you see the Dover demon?" I nodded, still unable to form words. Grace's face lit up with a wild grin. "This is incredible. We need to go back, try to get a picture." "No," I finally managed to croak out. "No, Grace, I can't go back in there. Not tonight, please." Her excitement faded as she really looked at me, taking in my terrified state. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, Ben, let's call it a night. But we're coming back tomorrow. We have to document this." The drive home was silent. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, the pale form, those glowing eyes. It was everything I'd imagined, and yet so much more terrifying than I could have ever dreamed. When Grace dropped me off, she hesitated before I got out of the car. "Ben," she said, her voice gentle, "thank you for coming with me tonight. I know it wasn't easy for you." I managed a weak smile. "Yeah, well, all in a day's work for an accountant, right?" She laughed, and for a moment, the terror of the night receded. "Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow." But rest didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing orange orbs staring back at me. And underneath the fear, there was something else. A pull, a fascination that I couldn't quite explain. The next day at work was a nightmare of a different kind. I was exhausted, jumping at every sound. And to make matters worse, Dave seemed to have made it his personal mission to torment me. "Hey Ben," he called across the office. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Or was it the bogeyman? I ignored him, focusing on my computer screen. But Dave wasn't done. You know, I heard a rumor that you were out in the woods last night with some reporter. Looking for monsters, was it? Should we be worried about you, Ben? Maybe you need to see someone. Get your head checked out. I felt my face burning as I heard snickers from around the office. But before I could respond, a voice cut through the laughter. Mr. Carter, a word in my office, please. It was Mr. Johnson, my boss. As I followed him into his office, I could feel Dave's smug grin boring into my back. Ben, Mr. Johnson said as he closed the door, I'm concerned. There have been rumors about your activities outside of work. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he held up a hand. Your personal life is your own business, of course. But when it starts affecting your work, when people start questioning your stability, well, that becomes my concern. Do you understand? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I left his office, I saw Dave watching me, a triumphant smirk on his face. In that moment, I hated him more than I'd ever hated anyone in my life. That evening, Grace called. I want to go back out tonight, she said without preamble. Are you in? Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to tell her I was done, that one night of terror was enough. But then I thought of Dave's mocking face, of Mr. Johnson's concerned frown, and I thought of those eyes in the darkness, calling to something deep inside me. I'm in, I said, but this time we do it my way. We went back to the woods, but this time we were prepared. I'd spent my lunch break researching the best cameras for night photography, the most sensitive audio recording equipment. If we were going to do this, we were going to do it right. As we set up our equipment in a small clearing, Grace looked at me with newfound respect. I'm impressed, Ben. You really know your stuff. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, even as her praise sent a warmth through my chest. Well, you know, when you spend as much time reading about this stuff as I have. We settled in to wait, the cameras and audio recorders running. Hours passed with nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night. I was just starting to think that maybe, just maybe, last night had been a hallucination brought on by fear and suggestion, when we heard it. That same keening cry, closer this time. Grace grabbed my hand, her eyes wide with excitement. Ben, she whispered, it's here. The bushes at the edge of the clearing rustled. I raised the camera, my hands shaking slightly, and then it emerged. In the green glow of the night vision camera, the Dover demon was even more otherworldly than I remembered. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent white. Its arms were long and thin, ending in those infamous elongated fingers. But it was the face that held me transfixed. That overlarge rounded head, those huge glowing eyes. It stood at the edge of the clearing, regarding us with what I can only describe as curiosity. It didn't seem aggressive, just alien, unknowable. I was so entranced that I almost didn't hear the snap of a twig behind us. Almost. I spun around, the camera swinging wildly, to see a figure emerging from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. My blood ran cold as I recognized him. Dave, well, he said, his voice loud in the quiet of the forest. What do we have here? Ben Carter, monster hunter extraordinaire. Dave, I hissed. What are you doing here? He grinned, and in the dim light it looked more like a snarl. Following you, of course. Couldn't let you have all the fun out here in the woods with your pretty friend. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about. His eyes flickered to Grace, then back to me. So where is it, Ben? Where's your famous Dover demon? I opened my mouth to respond, to warn him, but it was too late. A pale form flashed in the corner of my eye, moving with impossible speed. Dave's mocking grin turned to a look of confusion, then terror. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my days. The demon was on Dave in an instant, those long fingers wrapping around his throat. I saw its eyes glow brighter, saw Dave's body go rigid. And then to my horror, I saw something pass between them. A shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement on a hot day. I remember Grace calling 911, her voice shaking as she tried to explain where we were, what had happened. I remember the arrival of the police, the paramedics, the questions that seemed to go on forever. We told them everything, or at least we tried to. But how do you explain something like that? In the harsh light of day, our story sounded insane. A monster in the woods. A man killed by what? We had no answers. In the end, Dave's death was ruled a heart attack. A tragic accident, they said. The stress of being out in the woods at night, perhaps. Or maybe he'd seen a bear or a coyote and the fright had been too much for him. Grace's story never saw the light of day. Her editor deemed it too fantastical, too unbelievable, without concrete evidence. And there was none. Our equipment had mysteriously malfunctioned that night. It was just another campfire tale. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to my normal life. But how could anything be normal after what we'd seen? The image of Dave's lifeless body, those changed eyes, haunted my dreams. And beneath the horror, there was something else. A gnawing curiosity, a need to understand what had happened in those woods. Work became unbearable. Though no one said it outright, I could feel the suspicion, the sideways glances. I was the last person to see Dave alive, after all. And my reputation as the office weirdo didn't help matters. Mr. Johnson kept finding reasons to check on me, his concerned frown deepening with each visit. Grace was the only one who understood. We met often, poring over our notes, trying to make sense of what we'd witnessed. She was convinced we needed to go back, to find proof. But I hesitated. The memory of those alien eyes, that sense of another presence in my mind, filled me with a deep, primal fear. And yet, it was a month after that fateful night when I first noticed the changes. Small things at first. Food that used to appeal to me now tasted wrong somehow. Colors seemed brighter, more vivid. And at night, in the darkness of my bedroom, I could swear my eyes gave off a faint glow. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, I told myself. Post-traumatic stress from witnessing Dave's death. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something had changed in me that night in the woods. The Dover demon hadn't just killed Dave. It had marked me. Grace noticed it too. "Ben," she said one evening as we sat in my living room, surrounded by books on cryptozoology and stacks of notes. "Your eyes, they look different." I avoided her gaze, focusing on the papers in front of me. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." But she wasn't fooled. Grace reached out, gently turning my face towards her. Her sharp intake of breath told me what I already knew. My eyes had changed. They were larger now, with an unnatural sheen to them. "Oh, Ben," she whispered. "What's happening to you?" I pulled away, suddenly angry. "Nothing's happening. I'm fine. We need to focus on finding the demon again, on getting proof." Grace's eyebrows shot up. "Again?" "Ben, after what happened to Dave, I thought." "We need to go back," I insisted, my voice taking on a strange, urgent tone that didn't sound like me. "We need to understand." She studied me for a long moment, concern etched on her face. "Okay," she said finally, "but we need to be careful. Whatever this thing is, it's dangerous. And Ben, I'm worried about you." I brushed off her concern, focused entirely on the prospect of returning to the woods, of seeing the demon again. It was all I could think about. The next night found us back in the forest, our equipment set up in the same clearing where Dave had died. The familiar sounds of the nighttime woods surrounded us, but to my changed ears they seemed sharper, more defined. I could pick out individual creatures, could almost taste their fear on the air. "Ben," Grace whispered, her hand on my arm, "maybe this isn't such a good idea. You don't seem yourself." I turned to her, ready to argue, when I saw her eyes widen in shock. "Your eyes," she gasped. "They're glowing." Before I could respond, that now familiar keening cry echoed through the trees. But this time, it didn't fill me with fear. Instead, I felt a pull, an irresistible urge to answer the call. Without thinking, I let out a sound, a perfect mimicry of the demon's cry. Grace stumbled back, her face a mask of horror. "Ben, what are you doing?" But I barely heard her. My attention was focused entirely on the pale form emerging from the shadows. The Dover demon stood before us, its huge eyes fixed on me, and in that moment I understood. It hadn't marked me that night. It had chosen me. I took a step towards the creature, my hand outstretched. I could feel Grace tugging at my arm, hear her pleading with me to run, to get away. But her voice seemed to come from very far away. As my fingers brushed against the demon's pale skin, I felt that same shimmer in the air, that same pressure in my mind. But this time, I didn't fight it. I welcomed it. Knowledge flooded into me. The demon wasn't a monster, wasn't even from Earth. It was a scout, an advance guard for something much larger. Something that had been watching our planet for millennia, waiting for the right moment, the right person. I saw flashes of other worlds, of civilizations beyond my wildest imagination. I saw the future, a future where humanity had evolved, had joined with these beings to become something greater. And I saw my role in all of this. When the vision faded, I turned back to Grace. She was on her knees, tears streaming down her face as she stared at me in abject terror. I realized I must look different now, changed. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I understand now, Grace, I said, my voice overlaid with an otherworldly resonance. This is why I was drawn to the Dover Demon all those years ago. Why I've always felt different. This is my purpose. Ben, please, she sobbed. This isn't you. Fight it. But she was wrong. This was me, the real me, freed from the constraints of human limitation. I turned back to the demon, my kin now, in a way I couldn't fully explain. What happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The demon's response came not in words, but in images and sensations. There were others like me out there, chosen ones marked by different scouts across the world. It was time to find them, to bring them together, to prepare for what was coming. I nodded, understanding my mission. As I took my place beside the demon, ready to leave this old life behind, I spared one last glance at Grace. I'm sorry, I said, though the words felt hollow, meaningless in the face of what I now knew. Tell them the Dover Demon was real, and that it was only the beginning. With that, I turned and walked into the shadows with my new companion, leaving behind the world of spreadsheets and office gossip, of human limitations and fears. Ahead of me lay a future beyond imagining, a role in a cosmic drama I was only beginning to comprehend. As we disappeared into the night, I heard Grace's anguished scream echoing through the woods. It was the sound of the old Ben dying, giving way to something new, something that was no longer fully human. The Dover Demon had come for revenge, yes, but not in the way any of us could have imagined. Its revenge was against complacency, against the smallness of human existence. And I, Ben Carter, once a mild-mannered accountant afraid of his own shadow, was now its herald. In the years that followed, there would be more sightings, more disappearances. The legend of the Dover Demon would grow, fueled by grainy photographs and late-night radio shows. But the truth, the real truth, would remain hidden, known only to a select few. And somewhere out there, in the shadows between what is known and what is suspected, I wait. Watching, preparing, for the day when the stars align and the veil between worlds grows thin. For the day when humanity will be forced to confront the reality that they are not alone and never have been. The Dover Demon's revenge is patient. It is cosmic. To hell with it.